it's confession time. This is going to be a video about replacing the water pump in this Ford Duratec. And I did sort of get halfway through it, but I'm here to admit my failures as a man, really, because I couldn't get the pump off the block once I'd removed everything else. It was stuck, glued in there with the rubber O-ring. And after mucking around with it for an hour or so, I gave up and took it to a mechanic, and he earned his money, so to say. So I'm still going to walk you through and show you how to actually do it, so this isn't going to be a complete waste of time. So hopefully you'll, if you do want to give it a crack on your own, then keep watching.
In my case, the water pump pulley had gone. You can see here it's spinning too freely, and it has a bit of play in it. So it's making a bit of noise when running, but it's also leaking at the pulley side. You can put your hand under the pulley to feel if it's wet, but here you can see all of this pink residue. That's coolant that's been spraying out of the pump when it's under pressure, and then it's dried all over these hoses, the aircon pulley below its connector, and so on. So in principle, this job's not complicated. First, you'll need the wheel and splash guard removed from the front so that you can access the belt tensioner later on. But before you take the belt off the water pump, it's better to try to undo its bolts with the belt still in situ, because it will help to hold the pulley and stop it spinning when you do so. So the first challenge is getting a tool onto these bolt heads. There's not much clearance between them and the engine bay wall. If you have something like this crow's foot attachment, they're 10mm by the way, that might work, or you can try a ring spanner, although they tend to be quite small if you have one with a long handle, or a small 1/4" ratchet handle might fit in there. Better to use quality sockets, because I found one or two of these bolts were partly seized in place and they wanted a lot of force to undo them. And I started to round off the heads using the crow's foot and the ring spanner, but this socket worked. So then, if the pulley slips under the belt, or if you're putting so much torque in it that the whole engine is being turned by the belt, then you might have to find a way to mechanically hold the pulley. I had to do that with one bolt, where I was able to fit the screwdriver in place so as to brace the other two bolts against the power steering pulley, if that makes sense. And that let me put enough force on the stuck bolt to get it free. So once you know the bolts are loose, then you can pause and get the coolant draining. You'll need it drained to take the pump out, of course. Otherwise you'll make a real mess when you do take the pump out, because all of the coolant will drain from the header tank down to that level. On the Mondeo, the front splash guard needs removing to get at the bottom of the radiator. That's just a series of Torx screws, and then it pulls off. It might be different depending on what car you're working with. And then you can undo the drain plug, or just pull off one of the bottom hoses and let it drain while you keep working on the pump. So I won't cover all of that in detail, because I have an old video on flushing and refilling the coolant in this same car, and I've also done the thermostat in another video as well. All I'll say is you should pay attention to how much you drain, because half of that amount is how much concentrate you need to put back in the car at the end, assuming a 50-50 mix, before you top up with water, and that way you'll stay at the 50% coolant concentration. Okay, now the belt can come off the pulley, so you need to release the tensioner. Now I've covered that separately as well in my video on changing out the belt and the tensioner itself. Basically you need a 15mm socket and a bar to turn it as shown, and then the belt can just be slipped off the water pump pulley like so. And then the bolts already loose will just come out easily. And finally that pulley wheel will come away. Put it somewhere safe, and now you'll be able to see and access the pump itself. The only thing now is to undo the pump bolts, the bolts which hold the pump onto the front cover. Now this is not difficult, but you can't see two of them very well or at all, and those two happen to be placed directly next to two other bolts, which are part of the bolts which hold the front cover to the block. and you don't want to undo those by accident. So pay close attention to that and make sure that you're undoing the correct ones. You can look at the new pump to see where the bolt holes are, but basically they're the bolts which are on the inside towards the pump, if that makes sense. Once they're out, the pump is technically free to be removed, but here is where I ran into my brick wall, as I mentioned earlier. So even with a pair of channel locks gripping the pump as tight as I could, as you see here, and I tried a bunch of different other angles as well, and putting all my strength into trying to turn it to break the rubber seal free, I could not get it loose. So the solution apparently was to use a pry bar, but I was, like I said, quite paranoid about damaging the front cover, or just, you know, maybe cracking and splitting the pump body. And I didn't have a pry bar on hand, at least not one of that would be the right size. So as I said, this was where I eventually gave up and chickened out.
So putting the new pump in is, of course, just a reversal of that procedure, except you would, this is the old one, you would need to, when you put the new one in, you want to put some rubber compatible grease, like silicone grease, Merpol, around the O-ring, so that when you put it in, it's got a little bit of lubrication on there, and it's not likely to, not as likely to get stuck, glued in the way that this one was. You can see that this O-ring's pretty stretched and stuffed now that it's been taken out. So yeah, the mechanic did this. He put a pry bar on, he said, and he was able to get it off like that. I was sort of paranoid about doing something like that because the metal on metal contact and a lot of leverage. I was concerned about the front cover. It's just cast aluminium, and if you crack it, then you're really in trouble. So anyway, I was happy enough to make it his problem. So I'm sorry I wasn't able to show you the actual removal of the pump. This is a sort of know your limitations type scenario. In my case, I didn't have quite the right tools, and I didn't have time. I needed the job to be done reasonably quickly, and needed the car back on the road and working. So, you know, paying for a little bit of specialization was just a sensible idea in my case. Okay, so I'll leave it there. I hope that was helpful to the extent it could possibly be. I'll see you next time.